Hi, this is Gabriele Marewski, adventure traveler on Travel Fuels Life.
Hey everybody, and welcome to part 2 of the inaugural episode of Travel Fuels Life, the show where we encourage, educate, and inspire you to make your travel dreams come true. I'm your host, Drew Hanisch, and if you were here last time, then you heard our great conversation with Gabriele Marewski. She is a solo adventure traveler, and she just has some fascinating stories of her travels. We heard a little bit about her travels to Czech Republic, and we heard some of her walking and biking experience, but we've got a whole lot more. And in fact, I really wanted to take her through a progression on this show and kind of get a feel for where she started in terms of dipping her toe in the water all the way up to this great trip she has planned coming up to the Continental Divide. So we'll get through all of that stuff, and I just want to remind you also that for show notes and that sort of thing, you can check out travelfuelslife.com, and anything that we talk about on here where we have links and that sort of thing, you won't have to scribble down notes. You can actually just go to the show notes page and check things out there, and also leave comments, if you will. So we appreciate it, and without further ado, let's jump into part 2 of our conversation with Gabriele Marewski. So let's wander into kind of a progression of your travel, starting with you took a trip to India to near the Himalayas. Is that?
Yeah, that was in 2001.
Okay.
And that was a friend of mine was going to India and said, "Would you like to join me?" Mm-hmm. And yeah, sure. And so we walked in the foothills of the Himalayas, and it was just amazing.
Yeah. And
the people were friendly, and being vegetarian, I just loved the food. Everything was fresh. And that was just walking from village to village.
Okay.
And just amazing. And there I had a story where we ended up in this one village, and usually when we'd walk to a village, we'd want to have some chai tea somewhere. Mm-hmm. And we got to this little village, and there's a young man outside, and we said, "Where can we get some chai?" And he said, "Well, we don't have a shop here, but I'll make you some tea." So he invited us into his home. We sat out on the porch, and it turns out he was a student, and he was interested in art. And he had some books tucked up in the eave that very carefully, very well taken care of. And I said, "So who are those books?" And he says, "Well, those are mine." And so I said, "Were you going to go to college?" And he says, "Well, we're a poor sheep herding family." Mm-hmm. And so that's not an option for me. So they had some honey, and I said, "Can I get some honey?" Mm-hmm. And he says, "Well, come back tomorrow with a jar, and I'll give you some honey." So I came out by myself the next day with my jar. He gave me honey, wouldn't let me pay for it. His brother was there, and I met his mother, and his brother worked at the post office, and he actually accompanied me back down the mountain. And I said to him, "So what does it cost to go to a college here?" It turns out to be $500.
Really?
So I said, "Well, give me your address." And when I got back, I went to my neighbor and said, "How about if we sponsor him for college?" She says, "Yes, I'm in." So we sent him to college every year until he graduated.
Wow.
And became a teacher. And so I thought, this is direct giving at its best.
Yeah, that's awesome.
And he would write me these wonderful letters, and he sent me honey for a couple of years until the post office said, "This has got to stop. This honey's leaking."
Oh, nice.
But he said, "You changed my life. You gave me something that my family couldn't do." And I said, "No, Jagraj, you did this. You opened your doors and you invited us in. You invited this change." And so and then we asked him after he graduated and became a teacher, said, "Well, do you have a young woman in the village we could sponsor?" And we didn't get a response on that one.
Oh, no.
So
well, maybe so. You may get a something in the mail one of these days.
Yeah.
That's awesome. So, I mean, did that kind of open you up to the idea of, was that kind of your first introduction that opened the door in your mind to saying, "Hey, I'd like to do more of this kind of travel," or was that before?
I'd always kind of traveled.
Okay.
In college, I would take off. I'd drop out of school to go travel and then go back. And so it took me 8 years to get my bachelor's degree because I would get the travel bug that my mother had given me.
Thanks, Mom. Yeah.
And when I go to Europe, I usually stay with friends or relatives. So I would go by myself, but it was more I would be stationed with people that I knew.
Right.
And so the Camino walk was the first time of just, going out and walking on my own and seeing what happens, and not, that was completely out of my comfort zone.
So here you're on the Camino, and then did you decide you were doing your next trip while you were on the Camino, or did that sort of evolve?
It evolves.
Okay.
Yeah, and I guess it would, I need to get back to work, and then it would take a year to kind of percolate, and I realized what happens. So, for example, this year I went to Russia in June, May and June, and I came back, and then I realized I get a little antsy, and I'm processing the trip, and I put together a presentation and my skirts about the trip, and then this antsiness happens, and I realize it is me wanting to think about the next adventure. And then when I have that, so this year I decided to bicycle the Continental Divide in 2019. And then once I have made that decision, then I have my avenue of research. And then then I'm excited because I have something to engage in and go down that rabbit hole and read up on, and what bike am I going to get, and I think my gear is all good, but I have to recheck my gear, and just thinking about all that stuff.
Right.
So I think what happens is that I do an adventure, I come back, I chill and process. But then I want that excitement and that next adventure.
Yeah. So for a trip, that's going to be a long trip, is it not?
2.5 months.
Okay. Yeah. And so the process of planning for a trip like that, now that's next year, and you started planning for it actually.
I just decided in last month.
Okay.
And then it'll be next July 14th. And that trip I decided I'm not doing solo because, I researched where all the bear attacks are, and it is kind of like along that line. But I didn't want to be out there by myself days at a time. It felt a little too exposed, and there is Grizzly Alley, and I was reading in the book, there's one campground that says no tent camping due to grizzly bears, and one thing or another, and I thought, I'm not sure I'm really up for that. And psychologically, I've done, usually my average is 400 miles at a time by myself.
Okay.
So psychologically, to go from 400 miles to 2,500 miles,
yeah.
I wanted some support for that.
Yeah.
So I signed up with Adventure Cycling.
Okay.
And they do all these wonderful maps around the United States and adventure travel stories. And so they lead this, and it's just 12 people. We camp every night. We prepare food together. And so then, so the nice thing is that it's van supported, that carries your camping gear and carries the kitchen.
Oh yeah, this is a mint on the pillow kind of thing.
This is easy peasy, yeah.
But still a great adventure,
but steep.
Amazing.
It's going to be steep, and the reason I decided that's because I moved to Asheville area. And I realized all these mountains here, it's just perfect training.
Oh, yeah.
And so I thought, well, what matches what I'm doing now, which is, mountain biking and road biking and hiking. And so I thought, the Continental Divide, just country to country. So it kind of being in this space helped make that decision of what was next.
Yeah.
But I have a whole binder full of my bucket list of trips. I have Excel spreadsheets and all that.
Wow. So I'm thinking the Appalachian Trail will actually be a little easier to do after doing that Colorado and Rocky Mountains all the way up through Montana, all of that. That's going to be a lot of terrain you're climbing and dropping.
And I just got an awesome bike, a Kona Sutra, and I love that bike, and I'm just really excited. And now, I got the right gear. Yeah. And so, what they say is, if you got the right gear, you're good.
Yeah.
And I think after the Continental Divide, I feel the pull to go back to Europe and want to do a little more traveling, walking or biking in Europe. So, but then I had an opportunity. I got an email from a friend that said, I booked this bicycle trip across Madagascar and I can't go. Would you go in my place? And it's next month and it's 500 miles. So I checked the airfare and said, yeah, sure.
Right. Why not? And that was with a group?
That was with a group, yeah.
So because you've been doing so much traveling on your own, how is it adjusting to having a group?
Well, that was the first time I'd done a group trip. And I did have anxiety before I went about, adjusting to the group thing. And it was great. They were mostly Kiwis. So they were just really fun people and good stories. And a lot of, they'd been bicycling on other trips, so this group kind of knew each other, and I just kind of fell in with them, it seemed, and actually I loved it, and I realized that trip was never on my bucket list. I never would have done it, and it would have been too challenging to do that on my own because the cultural difference is so great.
Right.
And I felt that was the first time it opened my eyes to see the benefits of traveling in a group. Because again, it was van supported, and it was culturally very, very different, and it felt when we would walk out of the hotel, when we'd stay in a town, we walk out of the hotel, you'd immediately be inundated with people wanting to sell you something, and it was great. They're all good entrepreneurs, but at some point you're like, no, I just want to go for a walk by myself.
Yeah. Well, so. I think the thing that probably helped you out, and maybe that other people might struggle with a bit, is that you had sort of, when you have a mother who's got wanderlust, you did traveling a lot before, so you were already exposed to different cultures and kind of getting a feel for what travel was like.
Yeah.
So I wonder sometimes if it's better for somebody to get started with a group and just do these little excursions on, and maybe do a day trip on a bike or a day trip hike somewhere, just to sort of get the feelers there before.
Well, Meetup is great for that. When I first came here, I did Meetup hikes just to expose myself to the different hikes that were around, and to see what's possible. And then since then, I've found my own hikes that I do. But yeah, I think that's a good transition.
Yeah.
And I know this last year I went to, I'm a student at Lenore Ryan University, and I went to Florence on the creative writing class. And I'd been to Florence before, and it was in a class, so I thought, I don't know, it's going to be a little confined. It won't be an adventure.
Right.
And so I sent the email to a gentleman who had stayed at my bed and breakfast years before, and he lived in Russia. And I remember he said, come visit Russia. So I sent him an email and said, I'm going to be in the neighborhood. I could swing by.
Now, you're saying Florence, Italy.
Yeah.
Okay, neighborhood of Russia.
Russia, I'm over on that side of the world. So I found a ticket from Pisa to Moscow for $99. And he said, come. And so I had this amazing adventure in Russia that I'm going to post on my YouTube channel, Gabriele on the Road. And it's like in the style of a picaresque story of just, meeting up with people and having adventures.
Wow.
And my host, Alexei, is a banker, and his family has a country home. And he said, you can stay in my country home, and here's the bicycles, and I'll introduce you to my friends. And then it was just amazing.
Yeah.
I just absolutely loved it.
So was it St. Petersburg, Moscow?
Suzdal.
Okay.
So Suzdal is a little town of only 10,000 people and over 45 churches.
Wow.
So I know all those people are going to heaven there. And it's part of what's called the Golden Ring, which is it's 4 hours northeast of Moscow.
Okay.
And so I stayed there for a week, and then someone said, you must go to St. Petersburg. So I said, okay. And so then I went to St. Petersburg and had amazing adventures there, but nothing that was quite the gem of being in Suzdal and the people I met there and that lived there, that just were over the top amazing.
I think that's the thing that I discovered too, is that it is going to You can go, like Czech Republic, you can go to Prague. Everybody goes to Prague.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful city.
Yeah.
It's an amazing place to go. But it's not till you hit the smaller towns that you sort of get a feel for what the Czech Republic really is. And, it'd be the same as traveling around the United States. I mean, you can go to New York City, but we're all not like people from New York City. It's those smaller towns that you really get kind of the cultural mix. And understand what makes a place tick.
Yep, and you really get to connect, I think, and it's getting that sense of place. And sometimes when I travel, I think, oh, I could live here, and when I get to that point, I think, oh, I could live here. And I think, I really feel like I've just connected.
Yeah. So, of all the places that you've been, where's the place that you haven't been that you really would love to go? Where you feel like you get a good cultural exposure to something that you've always been interested in?
Well, I think I'd like to bicycle Asia, and I haven't been to that. I mean, I've been to India, but I haven't done other parts over there. And Thailand the food is really good, and I love tropical fruits, and so that's of interest to me. And Turkey, I'm just fascinated with Turkey. That I'd like to bicycle across Turkey and around the coast. And I do want to do the rivers. I do want to bicycle the rivers in Germany. And and I want to bicycle across southern France. And so I think kind of what I'm thinking now is that if it's very steep, I'm gonna hike. And if it's flat and a longer distance, I'll do that on a bike. So I'll alternate between the two, and I'll have my fold-up bike, and I could just leave that at places, and I don't know, it'll work out. I'll figure it out as I go along.
Right.
Yeah.
You always find an Uber somewhere to get you. I laugh because I was at Bryce Canyon, and as we walked down, I was looking and I was going, I'm not walking all the way down there. And I started walking my way down and had great conversations with people as I was walking along. And I get down to the bottom, and I was talking to a guy from Chicago, and he said, "Yeah, it's too bad you can't just call an Uber down here." Oh, I'm sorry, we're out in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of a national park. It's gonna be a little hard to get an Uber.
But sometimes you can. I've hitchhiked, and I was in Ireland, and I had just bicycled up. It was I can't remember what town I was in, but I just had a really strenuous bicycling the day before, and then the next day I went to go visit the chocolate factory. And I thought, I'll give the bicycle a break today. And I stuck out my thumb and hitchhiked, and ended up being picked up by a couple from the United States, from the Midwest.
Oh, wow. Have you had this situation? When I travel around, I'm in the Czech Republic, and everybody starts talking to me in English as soon as they walk up to me. It's like, do I look like I'm American?
Well, I don't normally have that experience. I know when I was in Russia, I bought a Russian jacket. I needed more warmth, and people would come up and ask me something in Russian. So I don't wear blue jeans. I always wear a skirt. I think because of how I dress, I can blend in, and so I think I don't stand out as a foreigner as long as I don't open my mouth. But when I do, everybody speaks English. It's sometimes it's a little disappointing. Because, I want to practice this language, or like for me, I like to speak German. And I say, okay, you can speak to me in English, and I'll talk to you in German because I want to practice.
That's good. Yeah, I did that with France. I would use a little of my French, and then they would speak back to me in English, and they'd practice on their end too. Oh,
and everybody says, "Oh, excuse my poor English," and you're going like, no, I think your English is better than mine.
Yeah. The fun part was I went to Dresden, and because I look German, I'm of German heritage. I walked into the hotel, and I went to the reception desk, and I said. What did I say? See, my words escape me as I'm Guten Tag. And after I said that, then I started speaking in English, and the woman looked at me so funny. And I went through all the Czech Republic, and people would speak to me in English, and I got to Germany, and the woman's looking at me like, "You're putting me on, right? You speak German." And I was because I look German.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So that's kind of an interesting situation to have happen. But I walked out of a restaurant in the Czech Republic, and a woman started speaking to me in English, And I just finally said, just let me know, why is it that people start talking to me in English? And she said, universal language.
Oh, right.
And I went, yeah, that makes sense. And
if you're not sure, that's the language you would start with.
Yeah. And I learned that in Czech Republic talking to my Airbnb host. He said, in Czech Republic, if you're talking to someone who's native and they're over a certain age, say 35, 40, they're probably going to know Russian as their second language. Right. But if they're younger, they're going to know English. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that takes the fear factor out of traveling as well, is that sometimes you can do the body language thing and you can have a conversation with somebody who doesn't speak your language, but you can kind of get by.
Yeah, but it's so much fun.
Yeah, exactly. There's another obstacle to get over, but it kind of feels like an accomplishment after you navigate your way through all of that stuff. So, yeah, absolutely. I heard you say something about taking or doing your bicycling along the Elbe River, which is a trip that I took, but I took it in a car until I couldn't take it any further because they said no cars allowed. But some beautiful areas through there. How far along the Elbe did you go?
I just did it was around 200 kilometers.
Okay.
And then it was, I think. I cut that short a little bit because I wanted to be in Dresden for the full moon. Because I wanted to get a picture on the bridge in Dresden under the full moon. Okay. And so I got to the town where I ended, and then the next day I took the train to Dresden, and I got there to get that shot of under the full moon on that bridge.
Nice. You had it in mind. So the question is, did you see cranes everywhere? Because when I went to Dresden, that's all I saw were cranes. There was the whole town is under construction. Yeah,
I didn't notice that so much.
No? Yeah, the bridge was actually even under construction when I went.
Not when I was there.
I mean, it's such a revitalization of that town going on. Yeah. And they're doing their best to keep it as true to what it was pre-war. Yeah. Yeah. Which is amazing.
And that's why I want to, bicycle more of the rivers, because I enjoyed that bicycle ride so much. And then my theory is, I wouldn't get lost so often. But, when I'm out in the woods, every trail looks attractive. And you think, well, I could take that trail, I could take that trail. But when you're bicycling on a river, you're kind of like, well, I guess I could, that's kind of a good guidepost. I'll stay along that river.
Right. Do you just take paper maps with you, or how do you? Okay.
Yeah, I do paper.
Yeah. GPS is kind of still iffy.
Oh, you're out in the middle of the woods. There's no GPS.
Yeah. I found it interesting that my GPS would follow me all through actually I lost it coming into Dresden. But I guess I had to just reboot my phone because it came back. But I was so nervous about losing the maps that I had. But at least Google lets you download the maps. And the GPS always seemed to work when I was in. But yeah, not knowing when you're hiking, you're not going to be anywhere near a road. So
Right. Yeah. Well, one time when I was where I ended my trip in Tübingen, the town before that, my back went out. And I was staying in this pension, and I got up, and I immediately fell down, and my back went out. And I think I'd eaten too much poppy seed cake. So I had a little too much sugar in my diet. But anyway, that was a joke. My trip was fueled with poppy seed cake and coffee, because I love poppy seed cake. And but anyway, I got on my phone, and I had the German telephone book in my phone. So I called up, this is actually a Sunday, and I called up a chiropractor, and left a message. Oh, can I come see you tomorrow? And that was going to be in Bayreuth, and the next town. And he actually called me back and said, "I'm closed tomorrow, but I will come in and see you," as I was a traveler and just coming through. And then so I had the train schedule on my phone, and I could say I could be there at 12 noon because I could look up the train schedule. So I take through technology. I got to Bayreuth, and then I looked up Google Maps and walked to his office, and I could do all that with being with the phone. It was just amazing.
Yeah. Technology has come a long way. I try to think of. It's great when you have it. Like, for instance, in Prague, I could just pick up I could look at my phone. It would tell me how far to walk, which bus I needed to pick up, or which tram I needed to pick up, and then I would be there. Timing was great. However, the time that I was in Austria, in Vienna, and I woke up in the morning and my GPS was, the GPS would show, but the maps weren't working. And I'm leaving at 6 a.m. and I have to navigate the entire town of Vienna to get to the other side to get on a freeway that doesn't go straight through town.
Right.
And I'm sitting there, one hand, and you've got to shift because there's not a lot of automatic transmissions over there. And so I'm doing everything you're not supposed to do with a phone. I'm just thumbing it to keep the screen alive so that I can see what street that I'm going down next to get. Yeah, it was an adventure. And then again, it was the same thing. Reboot the phone, and all of a sudden everything came back. But I was too nervous to reboot it, so I had to go back to all my map reading skills on a phone that didn't show me street names, but at least would show me that there was a street there, and it might get me out of town.
Right. and that was challenging also in walking, is sometimes, finding your way through towns. But the nice thing about walking is it's just easy to ask directions. Right. Because there's always someone around.
Yeah. The fun part is when you're in a foreign town and somebody asks you for directions.
Yeah, right.
And you're like, I felt so bad because I told this guy, which I thought, well, yeah, I'll help him. I got my phone and GPS. Well, I was turned around and I sent him in the wrong direction. Aww. And I realized it about 2 minutes after he walked away, and I was like, I almost want to chase him down and find him, but I know he's so far ahead of me now that
he'll ask somebody else.
He'll ask somebody else and get it figured out. So, all right. So then the big question that probably everybody's throwing through their mind is, how do you afford to do all the travel and all that stuff?
I just charge it. No.
Well, that's another episode.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, then I pay it off.
Yeah.
But I travel cheaply because my biggest expense is airfare.
Okay.
And I look for good airfare rates. And when I get to a country, I'll stay in hostels, in inexpensive pensions, and I've done wild camping. I'll take a tent with me.
Okay.
And then I don't have to pay for transportation because I'm fueled by my legs or a bicycle, and so then my only really big expense is food. And and in traveling in Europe, I find I always ate really, really well. And in Ireland, every day it was whatever local soup they had and soda bread. And I kind of like pick a theme and that's it.
Yeah. I probably need to ask you more questions about Ireland because that's a trip that I have coming up, Ireland and Scotland. So that'll be fun. And you're making me think maybe I should investigate a bike, because the only time I've done a bike trip is I've done city tours. And it is fun to go on, like Montreal, I did a bike tour, and you do kind of get a little bit more of a feel for the town at a faster pace than on your feet. Yeah. So you can do it in a day, but...
When I did all the peninsulas, and so one side of the peninsula, you're going up, 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 and then when I get to the top, I go, now it's the glorious ride down. And it was just like, yes! And in Ireland, I would go to the pub in the evening for tea, and at one place this couple said, "Oh, you must bicycle Sheepshead Peninsula." And I hadn't planned on it, and because whenever someone says you must do so and so, I always do that, and that turned out to be the best ride on the trip. And then someone else said to me before I left, they said, "Oh, you must go to Dingle," and so I did. And I ended up cutting that trip short in Dingle because it's such a cool, hip town with so much music. I thought, I'm just going to spend the rest of my time here, and I'm taking the bus back the rest of the way. But when people say that, I always listen, and it always ends up being a highlight.
That's awesome.
And then I'm flexible because I don't make reservations, so it doesn't matter if I change my plans or go a different place or whatever.
Yeah, I do those non-refundable reservations to save some money, and then I go on a trip and I'm like, why did I do that? Because there's stuff I'd like to sneak in here. Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's, if somebody was wanting to get started on doing solo travel, what would be, let's say, female, 24 years old, kind of wants to see the world, but doesn't really know how to get out there. What kind of advice would you give?
Well, I would have to say, it's really all about your curiosity and what gives you a spark, what excites you of on the world map. Where would I be really excited and curious about going to? So I think that's the first thing. And then the second thing is you book your airfare, and then you could find a hostel to stay for your first night and make that reservation. And then you just talk to people in the hostel, and they'll tell you where to go.
Nice.
And I think that's all you need is just do those, book that airfare, book that first night, and then just allow it to unfold from there. Because people are always happy to say, oh, go here or go there and check this out. In hostels, you meet other travelers, and they'll say, oh, join us for this outing. Mm-hmm. And that's what the whole world of hosteling is about.
Right.
And so that's what I do if I'm going to some place that I haven't been to before, and I'll usually book the first night in a hostel.
Okay. And then the idea of overcoming that fear of doing that, because stepping your foot out into that kind of travel for the very first time could be a little daunting,
yeah,
I would say.
Well, I went through that the first time when I was in Barcelona, and I was getting ready to get on the train to go to Irun, where I was going to be beginning my walk. And I remember being in the hotel, and I just had this fear come over my body. And I just said, okay, I'm just going to sit down, and I'm going to sit with this fear, because I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I don't know anything about this. I don't know.
Right.
But so I allowed myself to feel that. And I said, okay, done. And then got up and got on the train and ended up in Irun. And then, the rest was a wonderful adventure. So I allow myself I acknowledge that I'm allowed to feel fearful about it, but it's not going to stop me. It's there. I acknowledge it, and then I move on. And so I think that helps to say, I'm not going to push it away. And sometimes a little bit of fear is good, because that can kind of propel you to say, well, I'm not going to stay stuck in this.
Right.
I got to go.
Yeah.
And then you that's how you get past it, I think.
Yeah. I think the other thing is that you need to realize that if you're going to be ruled by your fear, you're never going to do anything.
And that's exactly right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's to me, fear is a test.
Yeah. And I think fear is really excitement. Excitement is that heightened emotion without fear. So the flip side of fear is excitement.
It's interesting you say that. I was going through very stressful times in my younger years, and I read a book, and it said that when somebody jumps out of an airplane, they experience this incredible fear. And it's just this feeling that pulses through their body. Right. And as soon as they pull the ripcord, and that chute opens up, then all of a sudden they feel this massive elation and this feeling coursing through their body. And the interesting thing is that that's adrenaline. And it's just the label that we put on it.
You just flip that switch.
Yeah. And that sometimes we tend to fear things and make them out to be bigger than they actually are.
Well, and the other thing is I find I don't listen to other people's fear. And so I can tell you that people will, when I travel solo, people would say, aren't you afraid? I mean, I hear that so much. I finally said, well, I don't watch TV and I don't eat meat, so I didn't get that fear thing.
Right.
And they didn't know how to respond to that. So I just had to say something, because, it doesn't always need to be the first reaction to things.
Right.
And sometimes I have to redirect conversations to say, well, don't rain on my parade, don't burst my bubble, and I want you to be a cheerleader, but I don't need to hear your fear unloaded on my trip.
Right.
And so sometimes you have to talk with friends to let them know that, support me.
Yeah.
And it's your fear, it's not my fear. And you could dump it somewhere else.
Right. Yeah, I think we hold ourselves. I mean, you mentioned going to Turkey. I would love to go to Turkey.
Yeah.
I talked to someone recently at a convention who told me about he lived in Istanbul for many years, and I just wanted to ask him so many questions about it, because we get news and we get reports and we're told, that's probably not a place you want to travel, and this isn't a place you want to travel, and it feels like we could really restrict ourselves on people's on other people's fears.
Exactly. And the reality is you get out into the hinterlands, you get out into the country, and not everybody's plugged into the horrible political situations.
Right.
There's just real people out there,
Yeah.
and they're inviting and welcoming, and that's in any country is like that, I think.
Yeah. I think it's just a matter of keeping your antenna up and understanding whether that fear is actually logically placed, or if it's just something that's keeping you from doing what you want to do.
And I recognize when that comes up, it's usually is self-imposed.
Yeah.
Instead of some real external threat.
Right.
It's usually the former.
Nice. This has been wonderful. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I know this answers probably a lot of questions in people's heads, and also hopefully gets them going, maybe this isn't as difficult as I think it is. Break the barriers down, kind of thing. So first journey starts with a single step, right?
Exactly.
So this applies here. Well, I thank you definitely for your time and all your insights on stuff.
Drew, it's been a pleasure.
Having you. Yeah, and maybe next year when you get done with your Continental Divide trip, I'm sure you will have lots of stories to tell from that. Yeah, awesome. All right, well, thank you very much. And how, if somebody wants to see your video and all that, we can actually post your links up on our show links page, so they can see it through our site, travelfuelslife.com, or
Gabriele on the Road.
Gabriele on the Road, and it's GabrieleOnTheRoad.com.
Yep. I don't have my website up yet, but right now I'm on YouTube.
Okay.
On the same Gabriele on the Road.
Very good.
And it's Gabriele.
All right,
There's many different spellings of that.
I was going to say, I keep wanting to put the second L in there.
Right.
Very good. Well, Gabriele, I definitely enjoy this all the way around, and I look forward to hearing more about your travels down the road.
Awesome. Thank you.
What a great guest. I mean, we had a pretty good discussion ahead of the recording, and I really wish I'd have hit the record button and been able to capture some of that, because she has such great insights. And really, like I say, the idea of inspiring you to get out there and do things that are outside your comfort zone, because, travel's not supposed to be hard. It's supposed to be fun. And yes, sometimes there are things that will make you nervous, or maybe you've got a barrier of fear that you need to get over. But man, when you do it, it's just liberating. It really is. So, Gabriele, I appreciate you being on the show. And I am going to post on our show notes page any of the links that we talked about, but also links to her YouTube channel. And as soon as her website is done, we will post a link out to that as well. So make sure that you check that out. It's at travelfuelslife.com, and you can just go under the podcasts tab, and you should be able to find it through there. Now, I am going to jump ahead. That's right. This is episode 1. We're going to talk about episode 3, because I want you to know about episode 3 that is coming up in about a week, and we're going to be following in the footsteps of a traveler, a friend of mine, who actually ended up taking almost the same trip I took through the American Southwest, except he did it with no carbon footprint. And so we're going to find out how he did that, and that's coming up in episode 3. But in between, in episode 2, we're going to do something very unique. Usually, when you listen to a podcast, an early episode is going to be devoted to a monologue of the host saying, hey, here's who I am, and here's what the show is about. I thought, why don't we do it a little bit different? Actually, I didn't think about it. My special guest host is the one that came up with this idea, and I think it's fantastic. So it's a chance for you to get introduced to me and the show. That'll be in episode 2 coming up. So until we meet again, I am Drew Hanisch, and thanks for listening to Travel Fuels Life. And remember to step outside that comfort zone